I took the assignment late in the season. One of those cleanup posts the older rangers like to pass on. My job was simple. Drive the service road up to the northern fire lookout, inventory supplies, and shut down the station for winter. A 3-day task, maybe 4 if the weather turned bad. The tower hadn't been staffed since August, but it still sent automatic hourly readings, wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, or at least it was supposed to. 2 weeks before my shift, the district office logged strange bursts of radio chatter coming from that sector. At first, they thought it was interference, maybe a ham operator. Then someone noticed the bursts always came at exactly the same minute every night, 2:17 a.m., right on the lookout's old ranger frequency. The only problem was that the station's transmitter had been shut off months ago. That's why I volunteered. Not because I believed in anything strange, but because I wanted the overtime. The drive up took most of a day. The road climbed through switchbacks, thick with pine and fog, the sky pressing low enough to touch. By the time I reached the gate, rain had started. Steady, fine, the kind that soaks you slow. The tower rose above the tree line another half-mile beyond, its outline faint against the gray. Inside the base cabin, everything smelled like dust and cold wood. The generator was already shut down, but the radio console glowed faintly from backup power. I checked the logbook on the desk, last entry dated August 28th, signed by Ranger L. Harris. End of season shutdown, tower secure. It was mid-October now. I flipped on the portable radio and tuned through the frequencies. Static, then silence, then a faint pulse. 1, 2, 3 beeps. I noted the time, 2:17 p.m. The same minute as the reports, just 12 hours early. Pattern repeated twice, then went dead. I told myself it was a calibration glitch, wrote it in the log, and went about the usual routine. Inventory gear, check batteries, confirm the tower's instruments. The climb up was slow, 40 steps of cold metal slick with rain. The cabin at the top was small, a single room with glass on all sides, and a wooden chair that creaked like an old throat. Everything was neat, untouched. The view should have been beautiful, but fog had swallowed the horizon. I turned on the shortwave receiver and listened for another pulse. Nothing. The silence up there was heavy enough to hear your own heartbeat. By sunset, the fog turned to dark. I cooked a simple dinner on the propane stove, recorded weather readings, and climbed into the bunk. The rain tapped a rhythm on the windows that reminded me of Morse code. I must have fallen asleep thinking about that, because when I woke again, the radio was hissing softly beside my bed. I checked my watch, 2:16 a.m., 1 minute early. The hiss sharpened into 3 short beeps, identical to the ones from earlier. Then came a voice, low, faint. "Station 2, come in." I said, "Copy. This is Maintenance Ranger Carter. Who's calling?" No response. The static rose again, then leveled into silence. I waited another minute before shutting it off. I logged the event in writing, date, time, pattern, duration, and tried to sleep again. But even with my eyes closed, I could still hear that faint click-click between the beeps, like fingers brushing metal. The next morning, I hiked down to the supply cabin and checked the equipment room. The transmitter was still disabled, its main switch locked. I tested the backup generator. Dead. No way it could have powered a signal. By mid-afternoon, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the ridge to the north, a line of black trees fading into mist. The radio tower stood alone at the peak, an iron skeleton against a pale sky. I climbed up again to check the wiring. Everything looked clean, no corrosion, no loose cables. As I worked, I noticed something strange, a hum beneath the wind, faint but steady, like distant machinery. It came and went every few seconds, syncing perfectly with the blinking of the dead transmitter light. By nightfall, it stopped. That second night, I stayed awake for the 2:17 transmission. At 2:15, the console came alive, the soft buzz of a live line. I leaned in close. "Station 2, come in." I said, "This is Carter. Identify yourself." No answer. The static flickered once, then a long burst of static filled the room. Within the static, I thought I heard movement, a faint scrape, like a chair leg across wood. "Who is this?" I repeated. Then came a sound I'll never forget, the squeal of the hatch hinges above me. I turned and saw the trap door to the roof slowly open up. Cold air flooded in. I climbed the ladder cautiously and stepped out into rain. The deck was empty. Only the wind moved, and the slow creak of the swivel chair inside, turning on its own. The transmitter light glowed faint green now, faint enough to look imagined. I reached down to unplug the unit entirely. The moment my fingers touched the switch, the hum stopped. When I went back inside, the chair had stopped moving. I slept on the floor that night with the radio off and the hatch locked. By morning, the tower was silent again. The fog had lifted a little, revealing the valley, clean, washed out, innocent. I packed my gear, logged the repairs, and began the descent. At the base cabin, I double-checked the radio log. A new line had appeared under my entry, written in a neat hand I didn't recognize. Signal received, all clear, shutting down. It was signed L. Harris, the same name as the ranger from August. I drove back to headquarters that afternoon and filed my report. The supervisor skimmed it and frowned. "That's odd," he said. "Harris didn't sign that log. He left early last season. Family issue. Tower's been empty since." I didn't argue. I just asked if I could check the radio logs from his last shift. He pulled the old binder from the shelf. Final entry, dated August 28th, read, 2:17 a.m. Incoming transmission from Station 2. Static followed by a male voice. Voice identified as mine. I closed the book quietly. That winter, the Forest Service decommissioned the lookout for good. The equipment was removed, the tower locked, and the road closed to vehicles. But sometimes, during night patrols on that ridge, rangers still pick up the same 3 beeps on the scanner. Faint, polite, right on schedule at 2:17 a.m. If you listen carefully, just before the signal fades, there's a second sound underneath. A chair creaking slowly, turning toward the microphone.
My first season as a forest ranger was spent mostly indoors, overnight shifts at a quiet base station in Utah. My job was simple: record weather, monitor the radio, and keep a log of everything that happened between dusk and dawn. The older rangers called it babysitting the woods. I didn't mind. I liked the stillness, the hum of the radio, the slow rhythm of hours that all sounded the same. The logbook was the one rule that never changed. Every shift, you wrote down the time, the weather, patrol movements, and any calls that came through. The entries were formal, even when nothing happened. It gave the night shape. I came to think of it as the station's heartbeat. One night, late June, I started my shift early. Rain had been falling since noon. Steady, cold, the kind that smells like metal. When I sat down, the logbook was already open. The page for that night was filled out. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but then I saw the handwriting. It was mine. Same looping R, same crooked dash in my sevens. Every letter matched perfectly. The entry was detailed too. Times, readings, even a few small notes. 2300, fog forming in Basin 6. 0015, patrol request approved for North Spur. 110, light rain, wind SSW 8 miles per hour. 0218, cougar sighting reported near Willow Draw. 0340, power flicker, generator steady. 0505, dawn thin but dry. I checked the wall clock, 2202. None of that had happened yet. I stared at the page until the radio hissed softly behind me. Then a laugh, the kind of laugh people make when logic slips for a second. Someone had to be messing with me. Maybe Alvarez, the day ranger, copying old entries to spook the rookie. I decided to treat it as a test of composure. By 2300, fog rolled across Basin 6 on the live camera feed. I wrote it in my notes anyway, pretending not to notice the coincidence. At 0014, the radio crackled. Patrol requesting permission to check the North Spur. I gave approval at exactly 0015. By 110, light rain began. Wind out of the SSW, 8 miles per hour. I laughed again, but it sounded less like amusement this time. Then, at 0218, a static burst came over the scanner. Unconfirmed cougar sighting, Willow Draw. I stopped writing. It felt as if the station itself were reading ahead for me. At 340, the lights flickered and the generator kicked in. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the last line to happen. Sure enough, dawn came gray and thin at 0505, exactly as written. When the day shift arrived, I told Alvarez. He smiled and said, "The book likes to be early sometimes. Don't think too hard about it." I tried to laugh, but his tone wasn't joking. The next night, curiosity got the better of me. I took a photo of the blank page before my shift started. When I came back an hour later, the photo didn't match. The new page had been filled again. Same handwriting, same detail. 2210, road closure sign missing at Junction C. 0012, Ranger Alvarez radio check. 0244, wind gust to 22 miles per hour. 0331, figure on mile 2 camera, no ID. I told myself not to look, but at 0012, Alvarez called over the line. "Base, you awake?" I glanced at the clock. 0012, exactly. At 0244, wind hammered the west windows so hard that the building shuddered. And at 0331, the mile 2 camera triggered. A motion alert, showing a lone figure walking along the shoulder of the road, head down, no flashlight. It moved out of frame without looking up. By then, I didn't bother writing anything. The book had already done it for me. The following night, I tried something different. I replaced the logbook with a blank notebook, same size and cover, hoping to break the pattern. When I started my shift, the blank notebook sat on the desk with a fresh page filled out in my handwriting. It was almost gentle about it. The entries were normal, temperature, wind, a single patrol check-in, but seeing my own writing appear without me touching a pen did something strange inside me. It didn't scare me exactly, it just made me feel known, like the station wasn't empty after all. For the rest of the week, it kept happening. The handwriting always matched mine, always recorded minor things that would happen a few hours later. It never mentioned anything big. No rescues, no injuries, just small moments, small truths. Then one night it started writing about me. 2331, coffee poured, 2 cups. 0047, window open, 3 inches, smell of rain. 0205, standing at north window looking for something. All true. I sat frozen, reading it line by line as it kept catching up with me. Every movement I made, it followed. I tried to sit still, to stop giving it new material, but at 2:30, another line appeared. 2:30, trying not to move, heart rate fast. That broke me. I closed the book, locked it in the storage cabinet, and left it there. The next morning, Alvarez asked if I'd logged the night. I said yes. He nodded, then said quietly, "Don't lock it up again. It doesn't like that." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he just patted the desk and said, "You'll understand." On my final night shift that season, I decided to face it. The book lay open to a blank page. I waited until 2200, then flipped the lamp off to make the room darker, quieter. At 2203, words began to appear. 2203, sitting in the dark, waiting. 2204, knows it's listening, doesn't want to leave. 2205, wind changing direction, time to go outside. The pen on the desk didn't move. The writing just formed, faint indentations first, ink following a heartbeat later. The air felt colder suddenly, like the building itself was breathing. I picked up my flashlight and stepped out into the rain. The storm had slowed to a drizzle. The trees swayed gently in the wind. The world smelled clean. Behind me, the station light glowed through the window, pale, flickering. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure inside, sitting at my desk, bent over the logbook. When I went back in, the chair was empty. The last line on the page was written neatly across the bottom. 2207, returned inside, everything quiet. The night continues. The next morning, I transferred back to day shifts. I told the new night ranger how to use the radio, where the coffee was, which chair creaked. I didn't mention the logbook. A week later, he left a note in my locker. "You write neatly. Thanks for keeping the log updated." I hadn't touched it since I left. Now, when I fill out reports, I still make my handwriting deliberately sloppy, as if to make it harder for something to copy. But every so often, when I pass that old base station on patrol, I see the window light glowing at night and wonder who's sitting at the desk and whose hand the book is writing with this season.
The maintenance road past Mile 9 wasn't on most visitor maps, just a narrow gravel track used by staff and contractors during fire season. It wound deep into Washington's National Forest, following a creek that sounded louder than it ever looked. My job that week was simple: inspect bridges, mark erosion, and check a few motion-triggered trail cameras the wildlife team had left earlier that year. I drove out early. Gray sky, drizzle hanging over the pines. The forest had that autumn smell: wet bark, cedar, faint smoke, faraway burn piles. I was halfway through the checklist when I noticed the turnoff. It was barely visible, more suggestion than road. 2 tire ruts curving into the trees, half overgrown. Someone had cut it decades ago. The GPS map on the tablet showed nothing there, just a blank green patch. But nailed to one of the trees was a small wooden sign, its paint nearly gone. I could still make out a word carved faintly into it. Cabin. I'd never heard of any cabin in this area. The district files didn't mention one. I almost kept driving, but curiosity and ranger habit got the better of me. I parked and followed the trail on foot. It wasn't far, maybe 5 minutes of walking, the forest growing darker and quieter with each step. Then I saw it. A small wooden cabin sitting in a clearing, half hidden by moss-covered trees. The roof sagged slightly, the chimney was cracked, and one shutter hung loose. It looked long abandoned. I called it in to base, standard procedure. Unmarked structure found north of mile 9, I said. Alvarez, my shift partner, came back on the radio. Copy, might be an old logging shack. Take photos, tag coordinates, but don't go inside. I agreed. Then I stepped closer anyway. The door stood ajar, and a faint smell of damp ash drifted out. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through a grimy window. The room was small, a cot, a wood stove, and shelves lined with dusty jars. Someone had left a tin mug on the table beside a candle burned down to nothing. I snapped a few photos and stepped back outside. That's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh, barely an hour old at most. The rain hadn't filled them yet. One set, leading away from the door and around the side of the cabin. I followed them halfway before they vanished into the undergrowth. I waited, listening. The forest was silent. Back at the truck, I logged the location, attached the photos, and moved on. That night, I checked the district archives out of habit. The last structure recorded anywhere near that zone was a ranger bunkhouse destroyed in a fire in 1972. The report included a single blurry photo, a cabin almost identical to the one I'd just seen. I stared at the picture for a long time, comparing details. The chimney, the angle of the roof line, even the same vent shutter. The coordinates matched exactly. I told myself it was coincidence. The forest rebuilds and forgets. People put up hunting cabins all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the image. The next morning, I went back. The cabin looked cleaner. The door was closed now, latched with a new piece of rope. The footprints were gone, washed out by rain. When I picked through the window, I froze. The candle was burning. A small, steady flame flickered inside, its light moving across the table. I stood there for nearly a minute, rain tapping against my jacket, before stepping back. My radio crackled suddenly. "Carter, you out at mile 9 again?" Alvarez's voice came through, faint with static. "Yeah," I said, "checking something." He hesitated. "That's funny. You just called in 5 minutes ago, said you were heading back to the station." "I didn't call," I said. "You sure?" "Positive. It was your voice, man. Same tone, same phrasing. You said, 'Copy that, leaving the site now.'" The static deepened, then cut out. I left the clearing quickly, hiking back to the truck. The forest felt different on the way out, quieter, like the sound had thickened somehow. When I reached the main road, I looked back once. Smoke curled faintly above the trees. That night, rain turned heavy. I stayed late at the station reviewing camera footage from that sector. At 1842, one camera near the creek triggered. The image was dark, washed by rain, but I could make out the faint glow of firelight between the trees, exactly where the old cabin sat. At 1843, the next frame showed nothing but darkness. The fire team reported no burns in that zone. 2 days later, Alvarez and I drove out together. He didn't believe me, but agreed to look. The forest smelled fresh after the storm, all soil and pine. We reached the clearing by noon. No cabin, just grass, mud, and the faint outline of a foundation half buried in moss. A few charred boards lay scattered, soft with age. I knelt to touch one, cold, soaked, long rotted through. The air above it felt warmer though, like a pocket of heat. Alvarez kicked at the dirt. "You sure this is the right place?" I said quietly. "There was a cabin here 2 days ago." He gave a small smile. "You've been working too many doubles." Maybe I had. Back at the station, I pulled the photos I'd taken on day one. They were all blank, gray static like fog pressed against the lens. The metadata showed the right times, the right coordinates, but every frame was white noise. I checked the log. The entry for that date had been altered. My handwriting, but the last line was different. Structure confirmed burn. No further action needed. I didn't write that. A week later, during another patrol, I passed the same mile marker. Curiosity made me slow the truck. Through the trees, I saw a faint orange light deep in the woods. The same place, same distance. I didn't stop. When I got back to the station, I checked the daily weather file. Under notes, someone had written a single line in clean block letters. Cabin checked. Everything as it should be. The signature at the bottom read, R. Carter. My name. I didn't write it. I still patrol that sector sometimes. It's quiet, calm, the kind of place you'd think the forest forgets. But ever so often, on foggy days, the smell of smoke drifts across the road near mile 9. When it does, I keep driving, because I know that if I stop, I'll find the same clearing, the same faint footprints, and the same candle burning softly behind the window, waiting for me to remember a fire that never quite went out. I joined the search team late on the second day. A solo hiker had gone missing in the canyon district, the kind of red rock country that eats distance and turns sound inside out. The air down there moves differently. It's dry, layered, full of echoes that never quite come back the way you expect. The weather had turned strange for spring. Light rain over the desert, clouds moving low enough to scrape the mesas. By the time I hiked into the base camp, the others looked worn thin. They'd covered 6 miles of switchbacks with no sign, only the hikers' footprints vanishing near the canyon rim. My assignment was to check the lower slot, a narrow passage twisting between tall sandstone walls. I'd been in that part of the park before, and it always felt like walking through a throat. The sound of your boots comes back to you too fast, like something waiting ahead already knows you're coming. It was early afternoon when I started down. The rain followed me as a fine mist, the light dim and red through the canyon's mouth. My radio hissed softly in its case, picking up the usual static from the cliffs. Half a mile in, I heard my name. It came from behind me, clear, ordinary, like someone calling across a hallway. "Carter?" I stopped and turned. Nothing but the narrow walls and the hiss of rain on stone. I pressed the talk button. "Base, say again." No response. Just static. The canyon threw sound around like it was deciding who should own it. I'd learned that early on. Echoes here didn't fade. They circled. I kept walking. Every few minutes, water dripped from the ledges above and splashed near my boots. Then, again, the voice. Carter? This time closer. I stopped and waited for it to repeat, to hear the pattern. The echo came back slower, drawn out. Carter. It didn't sound like me, but it knew my pace. I keyed the radio again. Anyone in the slot with me? Static reply, but beneath it, faintly, another voice came through. Not the dispatcher, not any of the crew I knew. It was whispering the same thing I had just said. Anyone in the slot with me? The same words, same tone, but delayed by maybe 3 seconds. I listened until the signal cut to white noise again. The rest of the team had warned me, the canyon plays tricks. You can hear a voice from the rim 100 feet up and swear it's beside you. But the rain muted everything now. There should have been no echo at all. I moved faster, trying to reach the open basin at the bottom where the walls widen. The trail there bends around a large boulder, then flattens out into a sandy floor. As I rounded the curve, I saw movement ahead, a shape, small, maybe 30 yards away. Someone standing, facing the wall. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I took a few cautious steps forward, radio ready. The figure didn't move, just stood there, head tilted slightly, as if listening. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person, just a trick of shadow and rain on the stone. The light pooled in such a way that it looked human until you breathed too close. I let out a long breath, half laughing. Then the voice came again, right behind me. "Hello?" Same word, same inflection, but it wasn't mine this time. I turned. No one there. The radio crackled softly, carrying my own voice from minutes ago, echoing the same hello, followed by the same breath. The canyon had learned me. I finished the sweep and climbed to higher ground, keeping my focus on the rock. I found no footprints but my own, no discarded gear, nothing to explain the missing hiker. When I finally reached the rim, the rain had stopped. The desert smelled clean, sharp like iron after lightning. At camp, I logged the route and mentioned the strange echoes. The lead ranger nodded slowly. "Yeah, that canyon's a repeater. Been like that for years. You speak loud enough, it remembers you for a while." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. One of the old guys used to say it repeats what it needs to keep. That night, I sat by the truck and listened to the open radio channel. Wind brushed through static like breath through teeth. At first, I thought it was just the storm leaving, but then I heard something faint. My name stretched thin through the white noise, almost polite. "Carter." The same pause. "Carter." The same rhythm. I turned off the radio. The next morning, we found the missing hiker's pack near the creek. Nothing inside was damaged, food sealed, map folded. The compass needle spun in slow circles. I carried it back to the station later that week and filled out the final report. Search incomplete, area unstable, likely moved downstream. The usual phrasing when answers don't fit. Before signing off, I walked outside to stretch my legs. The wind that day had the same hollow sound as the canyon, brushing the pines in steady breaths. I found myself saying hello into it, softly, half joking, just to hear what the world would do. For a moment, nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere down the slope,
The same word came back. Perfectly timed. Perfectly me. I don't go back to Echo Canyon often, but sometimes hikers ask if the stories are true about the voices, the radio, the search. I tell them sound plays strange games out there. It carries, it bends, it forgets where it started. But when I finish, I always make sure to add one small warning. If you hear someone call your name from inside those walls, don't answer right away. Wait. If it's real, it'll call again. If it's not, it'll start using your voice instead.
My floodplain outpost sat at the end of a street dirt road that turned to murr after rain. North of the Canadian border by a few hours, south of anywhere useful. It was a rectangle of wood on stilts with a metal roof and a narrow porch that looked over willow, sedge, and dark water. I worked nights alone that spring, logging river height, wind, and the wanderings of a moose cow that treated the levee like her personal highway. On a map, the place looked like nothing. In weather, it looked like the whole world had been flattened into grass and sky. The outpost had a simple rhythm. At dusk, I walked the boards to check for loose planks, then climbed the short stair and took readings. Barometer, gauge, flow, a photo of the river pole with my phone flash. I swept insects from the porch light and brewed coffee and let the generator idle until the batteries topped off. The wind never stopped. Even on still nights, it murmured in the reeds like a patient conversation held just out of earshot. The first time I saw the green light, I assumed it was a farm truck on a distant road. It was a faint wash of color, low in the willows, pulsing once every few seconds. Bright enough to notice, too soft to explain. I raised binoculars and found nothing but the color itself, as if someone had breathed mint smoke across the marsh and asked it to glow. It came when the wind shifted northeast and left when it turned south. That felt like a rule, the kind field people love, so I wrote it into the log. 2:20:08. Faint green flare over West Slough. Appears on any wind. I added a line that night for myself. Don't chase will-o'-the-wisp stories. We all have our small defenses. 2 nights later, a storm walked in on long legs. The light returned, steadier, closer. It showed in the same spot every time, just beyond a rusted culvert we hadn't used in years. When I stepped onto the porch, the wind leaned the reeds flat and brushed my sleeves with cold. The color thickened, then faded, like breath on glass. I lifted the radio and keyed the mic. Base, Outpost 7. Seeing some odd luminescence on the West Slough. You picking anything on the aerials? Static, then Alvarez's comfortable voice. Negative on cameras. You want me to call it in? It's nothing, I said, and meant it then. Probably a buoy reflection or a chem glow from town. There isn't town, he said, smiling inside the words. Keep your feet dry. The next evening, it wasn't a distant wash. It was a thread that moved with intention, slipping between willow stems, pooling near the culvert, stepping back like a tide that wasn't tied to the moon. I walked down the steps with my headlamp low and made the choice I'd tell trainees not to make. I followed it. The floodplain at night is all texture. Water shows black where grass shows slightly less black. The wind decides the route. I kept to the levee shoulder and counted fence posts. Every 20 paces I stopped and listened. The light held its distance like an animal that knows how far you'll throw a rock. When it paused, the reeds around it trembled against no visible body. I spoke out of habit more than hope. Evening, I said. You're on park property. Wind took it. At the culvert, the light pooled so bright that the mud at my boots looked bottle green. Inside the pipe, the air was colder. I ducked and shone my lamp in. The beam cut across corrugated metal and ended on an oval of water. In the middle of that oval, like something held just under the surface, the color glowed a few inches deep, not above the water, within it. When I shifted, it shifted, as if refusing to be flanked. I touched the pipe rim with my fingertips. My skin came away tingling and dry, the way it does near old electronics. I backed out, wrote the time, and told the notebook the lie you use to keep a job ordinary. Bioluminescent algae, possible. Sample, tomorrow. The sample never happened. The morning brought a small surge up the river, and the culvert took water hard enough to stand against. By afternoon, the whole slough wore the neutral brown of flood. No green, no tricks, only honest current. I told myself that answered everything, and waited for the wind to prove me wrong. It did, 2 nights later. The light reassembled across the water and drifted downwind toward the outpost. Not a beam, just a soft lantern glow, diffuse, steady, patient. It reached the stair and found no footing, and slid beneath the building and shaped itself against the pilings like a low fog bank trying to recall a room. The generator note wobbled. The radio made a small, polite sound as if clearing its throat. "Base 7, I said. "We've got power fluctuation. I'm cycling the Jenny." Before my finger left the mic switch, my voice came back through the speaker. Not in Alvarez's reply, mine. "Base 7, we've got power fluctuation." Same cadence, same tired rasp. I shut the set off and listened to the wind until my pulse had somewhere to go. I didn't sleep. Every hour I walked the porch and watched the light breathe under the floor. By dawn it was gone. I made coffee and wrote nothing. Rain washed the next day clean and cool. I spent the afternoon checking stakes and lines, repairing a loose hatch, and telling myself that wind plus water equals tricks. At dusk, I climbed the stairs with a thermos and stopped with my hand on the door. In the window glass, I saw the interior of my outpost: desk, chair, field board, peg hooks, the dented kettle that sang off key. And reflected perfectly in that same pane, another outpost behind me, where no building was. Same desk, same chair, same peg hooks, same kettle. On its wall, a green status light pulsed steadily at eye level in a place my wall had no panel. I turned without moving my feet, like a person dreaming they might wake up if they are careful. The floodplain lay as it always does, grass and water, a bit of willow, a low line of far trees. But the reflection stayed, a second room in the world's mirror, lit by a color nothing outside had. The pulse was slow, almost human. 2 beats, 1 rest. I opened my door. The reflection opened its door too, perfectly in time, with no door there to open. Inside my room, the air smelled of wet wood and old coffee. Inside the reflection, the green light made the illusion of a smell I can only call hospital clean. The chairs were both empty. That felt important. I didn't know why. I stepped in, set the thermos down, and stood in the angle where the window made more truth than I had patience for. The pulse timed itself with my breath. When I exhaled, it dimmed. When I inhaled, it brightened. I tried 3 deliberate slow breaths and watched it follow like a hand over mine. The radio chirped back to life on its own, a single tone, then silence, and then my voice again. Base 7, even though I hadn't touched the mic. The generator's note rose half a pitch.
On the peg hook beside the door, my keys knocked once against the wood, like a polite nudge to leave. I didn't leave. I did what the book in that other room would have asked if I had been writing it. I sat in the chair and wrote what I saw. 2109. Green pulse in window reflection only. 2112. Reflection shows panel we do not have. Status steady. 2117. Radio repeats transmissions in my voice a second late. 2124. Wind NE. Light under floor intermittent, then gone. 2130. Second outpost, reflection, looks identical except for panel, empty. At 2135, the pulse in the window strengthened until I could see the faint edges of its source. A box on the reflected wall, hand-sized, with a single glass eye. I stood and moved left until the real window frame hid the left edge of the room. The reflected outpost hid with it, but the green stayed, bright as a buoy lantern. I moved right. It followed, anchored to the idea of a wall that was not there. I said, "Okay," and my voice sounded like a teacher acknowledging a good question. "What do you want?" My radio answered in my tone, "Okay," then wind, then nothing. I walked outside and stood where the reflection said the other door should be. Air moved gently past my face, cool and wet. My hand found nothing where the knob would be. But when I shifted my weight forward as if stepping through, the world tilted strange, the way a floor feels on a ferry when you forget that land is not under you. I put my palm out and felt a draft that had shape. Behind me, in my outpost, the kettle began to sing wrong, a half step flat. The window pulsed green against the gathering dark. The reed grass made a sound like rain even though the sky was dry. I thought then clearly of shift change, clocking in, clocking out, the simple relief of being replaced by someone who knows the notes of a room. I said to the wind, "Not tonight," without knowing who I was refusing. The pulse softened. The wrong sing of the kettle faded. A trickle of geese wrote their slow line across the last light. In the glass, the other outpost dimmed by degrees until the pain held only my empty chair again. I slept hard for an hour and woke with the itch to prove I hadn't dreamed. Proof is a poor tool for floodplain nights, but we reach for what we have. I took photos of the window and found on my phone a dozen black squares, each stamped with times I did not take them. In the last one, a faint round glow hovered at shoulder height over my desk, too soft to call a light bulb, too round to call a reflection. I deleted them and wrote down the deletion like it was an observation. By weekend, the river crested and the road closed. I ferried out with the crew and handed my notebook to Alvarez at the dock. He flipped through, nodding at numbers, stopping at a line I had written in the margin without meaning to. If it asks, say no until you mean yes. He tapped it once and raised an eyebrow. I said, "Wind note," and we both let that stand for what we didn't say. They reassigned me to a ridge station for the summer. Simple mountains, honest storms. On my last drive past the floodplain, I slowed where the road straightens to water and looked for any color that didn't belong. Nothing showed. The reeds said their soft, evergreen words. The sky was a natural gray. Some nights at the new post, when the generator catches the way a boat engine does, and the radio pauses like it's waiting for a voice to choose whose mouth to use, I think about the green light in the outpost in the glass. Not because it frightened me exactly, but because it felt like work asking to go on somewhere my keys didn't fit. If you ever take that assignment and the wind swings northeast and you see a gentle color moving where colors don't, you can walk down and watch it breathe. You can even speak to it if you must. But if the room in the window starts to look more like yours than this one does, and the kettle sings wrong, and your voice arrives a second behind your mouth, stand where the other door would be and decide the whole answer. The floodplain is patient, the work will keep, and the light, for reasons you do not need to understand, will wait for the wind to change.